Most people believe planting an apple tree is the smartest decision a gardener can make. It sounds logical. Apples are everywhere. Every nursery sells them. Every gardening guide recommends them. But here's the uncomfortable truth almost nobody tells you. Apple trees are not the most productive fruit trees you can grow. In fact, compared to some other fruit trees, apples can be surprisingly inefficient, slow, and demanding. Years of waiting, constant pruning, disease problems, spraying, maintenance. And yet, millions of people keep planting them every year. Why? Because most gardeners have never been shown the alternatives. What if I told you there are fruit trees that can produce several times more fruit than apple trees, with less work, fewer diseases, and much faster harvests? Trees that can begin producing fruit in 2 years. Sometimes even sooner. Trees that can produce hundreds of pounds of fruit from a single mature tree. And somehow, almost nobody plants them. That's not an exaggeration. Many of these trees have been quietly grown for centuries in different parts of the world. Farmers knew about them. Entire cultures depended on them. Some even powered industries worth billions. But in modern home gardening, they've been strangely overlooked. Walk through most garden centers and you'll see rows of apple trees, peach trees, maybe a few cherries. But some of the most productive fruit trees on the planet are nowhere to be found. Not because they're rare, not because they're hard to grow, but because most people simply don't know they exist. And once you discover them, the way you think about planting fruit trees may completely change. Here's where things start to get interesting. One tree on this list can produce fruit multiple times in a single year. Another tree grows so aggressively that a single mature tree can produce an unbelievable amount of fruit season after season. And one of these trees was once so productive that it supported an entire global industry for thousands of years. But almost no one plants it anymore. Why? That's one of the questions we're going to uncover. One, because the deeper you go into the world of fruit trees, the stranger the story becomes. The truth is, the popularity of apple trees has less to do with productivity and more to do with history, marketing, and tradition. Meanwhile, some of the most efficient fruit-producing trees on Earth have been quietly sitting in the background, ignored, underestimated, and in some cases, almost forgotten. But today we're going to change that, because by the end of this video, you'll discover 13 fruit trees that can outperform apples in ways most gardeners never imagine. Some grow faster, some produce dramatically more fruit, and some will make you wonder why anyone plants apple trees at all. But before we get to the most shocking one, the tree that can produce an almost unbelievable amount of fruit from a single trunk, we need to start with a fruit tree that many people walk past without realizing it might be one of the most productive backyard trees you could ever plant. And once you see how much fruit it can produce, you may never look at apple trees the same way again. The branches were already bending under the weight of fruit. Not a little fruit, not a handful. I mean clusters. Dark, glossy berries hanging so thick they almost looked fake. If you saw this tree in a backyard, you'd probably stop walking. Most people do. And the strange part? The owner usually shrugs like it's normal. That tree isn't apples. It's something most people walk past without a second thought. A mulberry tree. And the first time you realize how productive this tree actually is, it creates a weird question in your mind. Why doesn't everyone plant this? Think about it for a second. Apple trees can take 5, sometimes even 7 years before they start producing real harvests. You prune them, spray them, protect them from disease. You wait and wait. Mulberries don't play that game. Some varieties begin producing fruit in just a couple of years. And once they start, they don't hold back. A mature mulberry tree can produce an enormous amount of fruit every season. Not a small basket, not a polite little harvest. We're talking buckets. Sometimes more fruit than a family can even keep up with. And here's where things get strange. For thousands of years, this tree wasn't just appreciated, it was essential. Entire economies once depended on it. Whole regions planted fields of them, not for the berries, but for something even more valuable. Silk. Mulberry leaves feed silkworms, and silkworms produced one of the most valuable materials in human history. The silk trade moved wealth across continents. Kings taxed it, empires protected it, and behind it all was the same tree quietly producing fruit and leaves year after year. So pause for a second and think about that. A tree productive enough to support an industry that lasted thousands of years now barely shows up in most home gardens. Strange, right? But productivity isn't the only thing that makes mulberries different. The real surprise is how forgiving they are. Poor soil? They usually handle it. Hot summers? No problem. Cold winters? Many varieties survive just fine. In other words, a tree that asks for very little and gives a lot back. Now imagine walking outside during peak season and seeing branches so heavy they dip toward the ground. Fruit dropping faster than you can pick it. Birds know this secret, by the way. They find mulberry trees fast. And when they do, they treat them like an all-you-can-eat buffet. You've probably seen sidewalks stained purple in certain neighborhoods. That's usually a mulberry tree working overtime. But here's the twist most people don't expect. Even though mulberries can produce unbelievable harvests, some gardeners actually avoid planting them, not because they're hard to grow, not because they taste bad. In fact, the flavor surprises most people the first time they try one. Sweet, juicy, almost like a mix of blackberry and honey. So why would anyone skip a tree that grows fast, produces heavily, and barely complains about the weather? There's a reason. And once you hear it, you might understand why nurseries quietly push other fruit trees instead. But before we get to that answer, the next tree on this list takes productivity to a completely different level. Because unlike apples, this one can start producing fruit in less than a year. And when you see how it grows, you'll understand why some farmers call it one of the fastest fruit-producing plants on Earth. The first time you see it happen, it almost feels like a trick. A thin green trunk, wide leaves stretching out like giant hands, and hanging underneath them, fruit. Bright, heavy, already ripening. Now here's the strange part. That tree might not even be a year old yet. Let that sink in for a second. While an apple tree is still trying to establish roots, still growing slowly, still years away from its first real harvest. This tree is already producing fruit you can pick and eat. That tree is papaya. And if you've never seen one grow up close, it almost feels unfair compared to apples. Because papaya trees move fast, they germinate quickly, they shoot upward. And before most gardeners even expect fruit, small green papayas begin forming along the trunk like ornaments. If you've ever walked through a tropical garden and noticed fruit growing directly from the tree's stem, that's the moment people usually stop and stare. It looks unusual. But what's even more surprising is how productive it becomes once it gets going. A healthy papaya tree doesn't just produce one fruit. It produces dozens, sometimes many dozens. Fruit stacked up the trunk, one above another, slowly ripening in waves. By the time you harvest the lower fruit, new ones are already forming above them. Think about that contrast for a second. Apple trees, years of waiting. Papaya trees, fruit before the year is over. That kind of speed changes how people think about growing food. And once gardeners experience that first quick harvest, something interesting happens. Their patience shifts. Suddenly, waiting half a decade for apples starts to feel outdated. Have you ever planted something and felt like the reward came faster than you expected? If you have, you know how addictive that feeling is. Papaya delivers that feeling quickly. But here's the twist most people don't realize right away. Papaya trees are not exactly what they seem. At first glance, they look like traditional trees. Tall, straight, branches at the top, fruit hanging along the trunk. But botanically speaking, papayas aren't really trees in the way apples are. They're technically giant herbs. No woody trunk, no thick bark. Just a fast-growing, hollow stem that behaves more like an oversized plant than a traditional fruit tree. And that unusual biology is part of what allows them to grow and produce fruit so quickly. Speed comes with trade-offs. Papayas live fast, they grow fast, they fruit fast. But they also don't last as long as many traditional fruit trees. Still, when productivity is the goal, many growers are more than happy to make that trade. Because a small space can produce an incredible amount of fruit in a short amount of time. Now imagine a backyard where papayas are ripening above you. Mulberries are dropping sweet berries nearby. And harvest season feels constant instead of occasional. Suddenly, the idea that apple trees are the default choice starts to feel questionable. But believe it or not, papaya isn't even close to the most surprising tree on this list. Because the next one produces fruit so aggressively that many people mistake it for a wild plant. Even though it might be one of the most underrated fruit producers in the world, and once you see how much fruit it can produce from a single plant, you may start wondering why almost nobody talks about it. People usually don't notice it at first. They walk past it like it's just another wild bush growing along a fence line. Nothing special, nothing worth stopping for. But then someone who knows what they're looking at slows down, looks closer, and suddenly realizes the branches are covered. Not with a few fruits, with hundreds. Small, round, bright fruits packed so tightly along the branches that the plant almost disappears underneath them. And once you see that kind of production with your own eyes, the obvious question hits you. Why isn't everyone growing this? The plant is guava. And the first thing that surprises most people isn't the taste. It's the productivity. Guava trees have a habit of producing fruit in waves, sometimes multiple times in a single year if the climate cooperates. Not a single harvest window like apples. Not one short season where everything ripens at once. But repeated harvests. Imagine walking outside and picking fresh fruit, not once, but again, and again, and again. That rhythm changes the way a backyard feels. Instead of waiting all year for one moment, fruit becomes something that keeps coming back. Now think about apples for a second. One harvest season, one short window. Miss it, and you're waiting another year. Guava doesn't follow that rule. And here's where things get even more interesting. Guava trees grow fast, much faster than most traditional fruit trees. In the right conditions, a young tree can begin producing fruit surprisingly early, long before an apple tree even begins thinking about flowering. So the pattern we're starting to see becomes hard to ignore. Mulberry, heavy fruit production. Papaya, fruit in less than a year. Guava, multiple harvest cycles. If you're paying attention, a quiet pattern is forming. These trees aren't just productive. They change the timeline completely. Instead of patience, they reward speed. Instead of rare harvests, they deliver abundance. Have you ever picked fruit straight from a tree and realized there was more than you could carry? That moment feels different from buying fruit in a store. It feels almost unreal, like nature suddenly turned generous. That's what guava trees do when they're thriving. And the fruit itself surprises people. Slice one open, and the inside can be bright pink, soft, fragrant, almost tropical in a way apples rarely are. The smell alone can fill a kitchen. Some people say it's one of the most aromatic fruits in the world. So here's the mystery again. Fast growth, heavy production, incredible flavor. And yet, guava trees are still strangely rare in many home gardens. Why? Part of the answer has to do with where people think certain fruits belong. Guava has a reputation as a tropical fruit, something that only grows far away in warm places. But newer varieties are far more adaptable than many gardeners realize. Which means the real barrier isn't the tree, it's awareness. And once people discover that, something strange happens. Their entire list of normal fruit trees starts to change. Apples suddenly look slower, less productive, almost outdated compared to what's possible. But if guava feels productive, the next fruit on this list pushes that idea even further. Because the next plant doesn't just produce a lot of fruit. It produces fruit so aggressively, so continuously, that some growers say once it starts, it almost feels impossible to keep up with the harvest. And when you see how it grows, you'll realize why many people mistake it for a vine, even though it might be one of the most powerful fruit producers you could ever grow. Chapter 5. It starts crawling before you even realize what's happening. One thin green stem reaches out, then another. Within weeks, those stems twist, climb, and stretch across anything they can grab. Fences, posts, trees, even the edge of a roof if you let them. At first, it just looks like a fast-growing vine. But then the flowers show up. Large, strange, almost alien-looking. White petals with purple threads spreading outward like fireworks frozen in time. Most people stop right there and stare, wondering what kind of plant could possibly produce a flower like that. And then the fruit appears. Small green orbs at first, easy to miss. But they grow quickly, swelling into smooth, round fruit that hang like little lanterns from the vine. And once the plant matures, something unusual begins to happen. The fruit just keeps coming. Not a small harvest, not a polite seasonal crop, a constant flow. This is passion fruit. And once it finds the right conditions, it grows with a kind of determination that surprises almost everyone the first time they see it. The vines spread fast, the flowers bloom again and again, and the fruit follows in steady waves. Now pause for a moment and picture this. You walk outside in the morning, and there are fresh fruits on the ground beneath the vine. Not spoiled, not wasted, just ripe and ready because passion fruit naturally drops when it reaches perfect sweetness. Tomorrow, more will fall. Next week, even more. Compare that rhythm to apple trees again. One harvest season, one narrow window where everything happens. After that, the branches go quiet for another year. Passion fruit doesn't follow that rule. Once the vine settles in, the harvest becomes something you check regularly, almost like collecting eggs from a chicken coop. A few fruits today, a few more tomorrow. That kind of steady production feels very different from waiting months for a single moment. And here's something else that catches people off guard. The flavor. Cut open a ripe passion fruit, and the inside looks like a pool of bright, golden jelly filled with crunchy black seeds. The smell alone is powerful. Sweet, tropical, almost electric. Some people say it's one of the most intense fruit aromas on the planet. Now imagine a vine producing dozens, sometimes hundreds, of those fruits in a season. Suddenly, the idea that apples dominate backyard orchards starts to feel strange again. Because passion fruit vines grow quickly, produce heavily, and turn vertical space into a living fruit wall. So why don't more people grow them? That's where the story gets complicated. Some gardeners love passion fruit the first year they plant it. The vine grows fast, the flowers are incredible, the fruit feels endless. But then something happens that surprises beginners. Because once a passion fruit vine really takes off, controlling it can become a challenge. It climbs. It spreads. It refuses to stay politely in one place. And in some climates, it grows so aggressively that people start wondering if they planted something a little too enthusiastic. But here's the twist. Even passion fruit, fast-growing, productive, almost unstoppable, still isn't the most shocking fruit producer on this list. Because the next plant grows in massive clusters, produces fruit that can weigh dozens of pounds. And when a single tree reaches maturity, the harvest can look less like gardening and more like something from another planet.